Alright, boils and ghouls, so here's a movie no one probably saw coming, and neither did I. Tusk, directed by Kevin Smith from 2014. We have Justin Long in here, which I like Justin Long. I like him in his arrogant roles. I like him in the supportive boyfriend role, like Drag Me to Hell. He just doesn't have a lot of range at all. So I'm not the biggest fan of him, but I like a lot of performances from him. Then we have, I forget the girl's name, Genesis something. It's a common name. It's a Spanish name. Garcia? No, whatever. It don't matter. Who plays the girlfriend of... Oh, what's his name in this movie? It'll come to me. Justin Long's character. And we have Haley Joel Osment in this movie. A much bigger, fatter, and older Haley Joel Osment than you may remember from The Sixth Sense back in '99. And then we have Michael Parks, who does a great job in this role in this film of this crazy guy who, let me say this, the premise for this movie, and actually, let me start with this. This may shock some people. I'm not a big Kevin Smith fan at all. I've never really cared for his movies. It's just his humor. It doesn't jive with me. It's just not my humor. Most of the time. I've seen Clerks. I've seen Mallrats. I've seen Chasing Amy. Dogma, I actually really enjoy. The aforementioned ones, they're funny movies. But it just doesn't work for me on a level that ever got me into Kevin Smith. And Jay and Silent Bob is whatever. I think it's stupid, but I mean, to each their own, right? The only film by Kevin Smith I really loved was Red State. I thought Red State was an excellent film. And this is not to say I don't think he's a great director and a great writer. I think he is. It's just not for me. That's just simple as I can put it. It's not for me. Most of Kevin Smith's stuff just isn't. So Tusk, I know, originated from a podcast. Correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone knows the backstory on this better than I do, because I looked it up briefly. It was an episode of his podcast, and somebody, they were making up stories, and then somebody told the story of the walrus and the carpenter, I think it was called, and then he ended up putting on Twitter and other platforms #yes or #no for it to be turned into an actual feature-length film. And overwhelmingly, people voted yes. And so that's how this movie got started. Now, this film is fucking ridiculous in so many ways, but this is still back in the early 2010s, even late 2000s, early 2010s to mid, maybe, that A24 was releasing some good movies. Gareth, if you ever see this motherfucker, always gives me shit for A24. Thinks I'm a huge A24 fan, just because I thought X and Pearl were both near to actual masterpieces. That's it, bro. That's really... I like a handful of A24's older stuff, in this era. But I'm not a huge A24 fan. Now, just the premise for this film. If anyone hasn't seen this movie, you should just go watch it. It's on Look Movie. I know it's not really streaming anywhere unless you rent it, but Look Movie has it. So, Justin Long plays this character who is a dickhead, cheating on his girlfriend all the time, and him and his seemingly best friend, Haley Joel Osment's character, have this podcast called the Nazi Party. Notsee, Nazi Party. And the way he ends it all the time, Justin Long, with, "Don't forget to join the Nazi Party." It reminds me of Mike Myers, the way he delivers those lines. But I think he does a great job in this movie. Usual with... I wasn't a huge fan of Barbarian, but he plays a similar arrogant prick. He does those type of characters very well. But he ends up going to Canada to do an interview for the podcast on this Kill Bill kid, who chopped his arm off or something like that. It's been forever since I've seen this. And he needs a story now because the kid ended up killing himself before they could do the interview. So he went viral for cutting off his whatever, arm, leg, whatever it is. And it went viral. And then he killed himself when Justin Long gets there in Canada to do this interview with him. So he's desperate for a story, and he finds like an ad. And he ends up following up with it, talking to the guy. He's 2 hours away from where he is. I think Winnipeg it is. Funny, I can remember where he is, but I can't remember other certain details. But that's how it is. So this man ends up inviting Justin Long's character to his house. Like his very, very nice house in the middle of nowhere. And ends up wanting to turn him into a walrus. Now, when you say it out loud, it sounds insanely ridiculous. And don't get me wrong, this movie's so over the top. It is so unbelievable. It is so crazy. And we're going to dissect and nitpick the shit out of those things. There's a lot of them. But this is a movie I can throw on any time and enjoy the shit out of it. Because this movie is effective as a body horror film. And we'll get into some of that. But the whole premise for this movie is just, it's bonkers. But yet it's still a great time. At least for me. And this was like, this was after Human Centipede, right? When we got that little burst of the body horror again, but conjoining people together and like surgery against people's will, amputating limbs and stuff like that. So let's talk Tusk from 2014. Also, when I first saw this movie, again, I don't want to keep saying, but as ridiculous the premise is, to want to turn somebody into a fucking walrus, it is effective in certain areas and certain scenes. This movie has issues for sure, which I think the main issue that this movie has is the plot is just way too bare bones and simple for it to be stretched to a feature-length film. I think this would have worked a lot better as like a 35, 40 minute, 45 max short. I think it would have been a lot better because after a while, the pacing slows down and it kind of just has nowhere else to go because he's already turned this guy into a walrus. So the pacing is just a little off at times, and there's a few other things, but for the most part, I highly, highly enjoy this film. And I know before this last cut, before that one, I said, let's go and talk this movie. About 10 minutes into this video. You know how it is, we got long intros around here before we dive in spoilers, which if anyone hasn't seen this movie, I can't even say like a plot synopsis or that I can't give spoilers because you know exactly what you're getting here. Like, you know the plot of this movie. Even just the name and the cover art, you know this guy's getting turned into a walrus at some point. But like I said, there are some effective scenes in this movie that actually freaked me out the first time watching it. And Haley Joel Osment's character is Teddy, and Wendy is Justin Long's girlfriend. Then also, we have Johnny Depp in this movie. And the third negative I really have with this movie is the tone. It's very uneven through some of this movie. A decent amount of it. Like, it doesn't know if it wants to be serious and be taken seriously, even with the premise being so outlandish and just batshit insane, or if it wants to be like a horror comedy. So the tone is very uneven through this film. But we open up with Wallace, and they're doing their podcast, The Nazi Party. And it was the leg that the Kill Bill guy cut off that went viral and stuff on the internet, and then kills himself when Wallace gets to Canada. And there's this is what I mean. There's this whole scene with one of the attendants at the airport, like the security guy, and checks your passport. And they go on this whole 5-minute or so scene with this guy telling him about Canada and then pointing at the flag, and that, we're never blue here in Canada, and we're optimistic. We're not nice, but we are never blue. See that flag over there, the maple leaf? It's just red and white. You Americans, you got red, white, and blue. You don't see any blue in our flag. All of that, like that, I don't know. That's where the tone, fluctuates, and it's very jarring at times. So Wallace ends up going to Canada. He stops in a bar. It's just called H. That's the name of the bar. Unless he's just looking up and he's a fucking moron, and it's just a neon sign of the letter H, and he thinks it's the name of the bar. I don't know. I've never heard of a bar with one letter as the name. Like, I don't get it. But he's at the H bar after finding out that who he came to interview, Kill Bill Kid, killed himself. So now he needs a story. He feels like he came all the way out here. He paid $500 and something, he says, for the ticket. Might as well get a story while he's there. And then he ends up stopping in a convenience store, which I do like this idea. I like how Johnny Depp's character, he plays like a private detective or something like that. And he's been tracking this serial killer for years, and this guy's killed like 20-something people, if I recall. So he's been doing it a long time. But when Wallace is in the bathroom, and then he goes and he looks at the pinup board with all the, ads or people saying, if, we need a babysitter, call this number, and he ends up reading this letter that's posted on there that's saying that this guy sailed the seas of the ocean blue and has so many tales from the past in his life that he wants to get out in his old age, and he ends up contacting this guy, and that's how he ends up going. It's 2 hours, I think, from where he is in Winnipeg, Canada. So he ends up stopping at this convenience store, and he loves like Slurpees and like big soft drinks. And I like how Johnny Depp's character, which is something, I don't know, his whole character doesn't work for me in this movie. He repeats shit with that stupid accent, and it just doesn't work. That's another negative with this movie. But later on, when the detective, Depp, and Wendy and Teddy are out looking for him, looking for Wallace here, knowing that he's probably taken from this serial killer that Johnny Depp's character has been following and trying to track down and capture all these years. So he has an idea, and he asks Wendy, everyone has a ritual when they're driving, like either smoke a cigarette or drinking coffee. Some people chewing tobacco that they have to spit out the window. So it's a good idea and good thinking on his part to try to look for those clues. And she ends up saying that, yeah, his thing is big soft drinks from convenience stores. And that's a little thing that leads to them finding him later on. But of course, it's too late by then. I was pretty sure that one of the convenience store girls behind the counter was Johnny Depp's daughter, and on Prime, you could look up the cast. It is. It's Lily Rose Depp. I think why this movie, despite the flaws that I've been mentioning, works so well for me is, one, Michael Parks kills it in this. Two, Justin Long does a great job in this, and both of them are the whole movie. We have Haley Joel Osment and whatever her name is in little supporting roles, and then there's this whole subplot, and this is again where I feel like this would have worked better as a short. They have this whole subplot that she's being treated terribly by Wallace. Almost forgot his name. And she knows that he's cheated on her many times, and Teddy's his best friend, and there's an affair going on between Wendy and Teddy. So, again, it just feels like it's in there to stretch this to a feature-length film, because the plot is so thin. So then Wallace, got it that time, ends up at the house of Howard Howe. It's a lot of words with H's, but that's a fake name, most likely. They say that later on when Johnny Depp, the detective, is talking with Teddy and Wendy when they're looking for him. But he starts telling him all these stories, that he was lost at sea, and that he knew Ernest Hemingway, and that Ernest Hemingway said to him, like a famous quote. I forgot what it is. It's something about being drunk and like to learn not to, talk shit when you're drunk, or something like that. I don't remember. I like how when he starts talking about walruses a bit, like a little bit of foreshadowing. Like, he's not being creepy about it. He's just admiring, shows an admiration for walruses. I mean, that's understandable. He was trapped at sea. He was out at sea many times. It makes sense. But I love the fact that there is a cock of a walrus on this guy's wall. That's hysterical. And then he offered him tea when he first got there. And he starts, feeling woozy here. Before you scream feds again. But then Wallace ends up collapsing and being knocked out from whatever he was drugged with from Howard Howe. Now, there's something I almost forgot about that I really wanted to mention. And again, it's not a big thing. It's a nitpick from me. But this guy, Howard Howe, is a serial killer who's been killing for many, 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 many years. 20-something people. And all the bodies show up, like surgery was done to them. And Johnny Depp's character even says when he talked to the mother of this kid that he was like close to like saving. He was right outside the house of Howard Howe, and he pretended to be slightly mentally handicapped or like talks funny and stuff. And he tricks Johnny Depp's character, and he says that this I forgot, he was like a high schooler or something. He was probably in the house, and he was right outside Johnny Depp, and he wasn't able to save this guy. See how after I go on minutes long of a tangent, I can still circle back to what I was talking about at the very beginning of those few minutes? I was trying to say that this guy's a serial killer, and he's trying to make walruses out of people. And the way he's luring them in, I don't know if this is what he always does, but I guess what? Did he just put that flyer up, with all his stories and to contact him to lure somebody in? Just hoping somebody would actually call that number, like, anytime soon? Does he have a time schedule to make his walrus? Is he dying or anything? He doesn't say he is at any point in this movie. So, how does he know that he doesn't get a call for like a year or a year and a half? When's the last time you were in a bathroom? And, I mean, this isn't on the stall wall or anything like that, but close enough. And see a number and say, call me, or for whatever reason, on a bathroom wall. And actually took your phone out and called. So this guy could be waiting for years before. So is he putting up these flyers in bars all over the place? Because that seems very dangerous. I don't know. I mean, it really doesn't matter at all. But it's just something I was thinking of here. Oh, so I have a video idea for sometime this week. I want to do this. Since Tusk is very reminiscent of Human Centipede. After the South Park episode Human Centipede, which we just watched on the first South Park Saturday, the next one will be next weekend, so it's going to be every other weekend. It was a blast the first time, so we watched Human Centipede as the last episode. So I want to do a stream and see is it possible to take that movie seriously and not laugh as much as possible throughout it, after being so used to the parody of it in South Park. I think that's a good little experiment, so look forward to that. Now, up until the point that he knocks him out, and then he wakes up the next morning, and he gives a whole bullshit excuse that he was bitten by a brown recluse spider. That's what he says to him. And that the doctor came by a half hour ago and now he's on his rounds, even though they're in the middle of nowhere. And then he says the doctor took all the phones out of his house because he thought that this guy shouldn't be disrupted during his healing. But before we go to the scene where he awakens, the guy's not been really too creepy. Yeah, he gives us some creepy vibes here and there. But this guy is so arrogant, Justin Long's character. But up until the scene where Justin Long wakes up and gains consciousness again, Howard Howe, this guy, doesn't seem like a total nutcase. Like, I'm gonna keep saying Justin Long, but Wallace, because he's such an arrogant person, he's ignoring all the red flags, and he's just trying to work this guy up, and he's just saying how everything is so cool what he's saying. Is he being sincere? I don't know, probably not, with the way that his character's portrayed throughout this whole movie. But there's nothing this guy's done that's, concerning, or majorly concerning at least. Then you wake up, and this whole bullshit story from this guy. Then you find out that your leg's been amputated. And his whole story is that this spider bit him, and so the venom doesn't get to his heart and kills him. They had to amputate his leg off. Could you imagine? Now really put yourself, and this is where I say this movie's pretty effective in this department. If you put yourself in Wallace's shoes, which whenever I rewatch a movie and do a video on it, I always try to watch a movie like it's the first time. Like it's a new experience watching it since every other experience watching it, and I always try to look for new things. But could you imagine waking up after being drugged, then looking down and your leg is gone? And there's nothing you can do. Like you are in shock, just like he is in that scene. Now, could you imagine this crazy guy who just chopped your leg off that invites you to dinner and says 6 p.m. sharp, and then starts laying some bombshells on you that he wants to turn you into a walrus? Imagine being in that position for a minute. Just really try to put yourself into his character and pretend it's happening to you. You're being told you're at the complete mercy of this crazy lunatic, who he mentions later in a story that he was in an insane asylum because, I forgot, the orphanages, I think it was, were getting shut down, and they ended up moving a lot of people from the orphanages to insane asylums and, mental hospitals. And he was raped, he was abused, he was beaten. Doesn't give him an excuse to turn people into fucking walruses at all, but I mean, he's been through some shit. But you have a person who just amputated your leg telling you he's going to turn you into an actual walrus, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. Nothing. No matter what, you are going to have your body mutilated and all refixed up in weird-ass ways and put into a walrus skin suit. I am the Eggman. They are the Eggmen. So you have to live out the rest of your days as a freaky walrus person. It's so bizarre, but if you put yourself in that character and from his eyes and his point of view and pretend that's you, that's got to be one of the most terrifying things ever. Ever. To be told that you're going to be turned into an abomination, that he's going to fuck your body up royally, to turn you into a walrus that he feels guilty about for eating to survive before he was rescued when he was shipwrecked and lost at sea fucking 50, 60 years ago. But hey, walruses are fucking cool. So I don't blame this guy half as much. Speaking of can you imagines, he ends up, and I don't know why this guy, if he's this great serial killer that's evaded detectives and police for all these years with 20-something victims, he's just gonna leave this dude's cell phone laying around right in the house where this guy's in a wheelchair and he can definitely get to it. I don't know about any of that, but he ends up calling Wendy, his girl, and she's with Teddy, and that's when we find out that they're having an affair, and she feels, cared for, she feels loved with Teddy, and he's a cheating prick, Wallace. But I do like that they make Wallace such a despicable character and person, and have Wendy run to his sweet, caring best friend for love and comfort. And then in the end, when they show up to try to rescue him, it all kind of floods back to her, like how much she cares for him, because she is heartbroken, and how can anyone not be? You walk in and you see your friend slash boyfriend is a fucking walrus swimming around and flopping around a pool inside this deranged man's mansion. But all of that works well for me. So since the two of them are together, they didn't pick up or see Wallace's calls until the next morning. And he ended up leaving voicemails on both of their cell phones. And she hears it and freaks out immediately. Goes right to Teddy, wakes him up. He's checking his phone after she says, "Oh my God, he called you too." They're listening to it, and it's a spooky call, man. I mean, imagine again, like getting a call from your friend or your boyfriend saying that you've been abducted and that your leg has been cut off and he wants to turn you into some type of animal. Like, when you really put yourself in the shoes of these characters, man, that's when this movie is very effective. Just thinking of how you would react and the shock you would be in, and like just wishing you can kill yourself at that point. You're never going to be able to be changed back to a normal human being after all the stuff he's done to this person. You're a walrus forever. You dead. So Wallace better get used to being a walrus. One thing I really enjoy about this movie is the practical effects, and the effects look good. Like, when his legs are amputated, then we have that scene when this guy just rambles and rambles and rambles. He's a fucking maniac, but he's doing surgery. And I like how Kevin Smith directed this, but I like how he uses different close-up shots and different angles that you can get a glimpse and an idea, so your head fills in. Oh my God, what is this guy going to look like? At a few points in this movie. And when he's giving his whole speech, and you know that this guy's going to look grotesque. You know Wallace is going to be on that table with more limbs amputated and everything like that. But then when you finally see it, like the arms grafted together and he's missing both his legs now, and it all looks great. So all the effects in this movie look really, really good. Since we've been talking about, the body horror and amputating legs and limbs and stuff like that, I think one of the best examples of that, like in recent memory, where somebody is, disfigured and limbs are amputated and stuff. Damien Leone's All Hallows Eve. The anthology, the first movie with Art the Clown, years before Terrifier. And in the end of that Terrifier, the third short, it's a 3-part anthology, he ends up, spoilers if you haven't seen it, he ends up catching the girl. And she wakes up to all of her limbs amputated, and the words cunt and slut and all these things carved into her body, and just all her body has been completely deformed in every way. She's just stubs, 4 stubbies, and then the look of just insanity and shock at the same time, like, oh my God, there's no way this is happening. There's no way this is happening. That's a great example of waking up, having your body just fucked in every single way, and it's irreversible. And then we finally see the finished product of Wallace the Walrus. That's his name from now on. Even though his name officially, from Howard Howe, whatever his name is Tusk. Or Mr. Tusk. Which honestly, I think that's a better name. I mean, it doesn't look fantastic, like him in the skin suit, but it looks good. Like, it's passable. I believe it. Like, it's not hyper realistic or anything, but the images it puts in your head and the thoughts it puts in your head, like, again, what the fuck do you do in this situation? You are now a walrus, and you must become a walrus and live as a walrus and only a walrus, or you will die. Are the exact words from this guy to Wally the Walrus. I'm going with that one. And then he teaches him how to swim. Or when I say teach him how to swim, I mean like almost drown his ass. After going through all this trouble to get a freaking person to turn into a walrus again, because it seems like he hasn't been successful. Seems like all the people he's killed, they've found body parts and stuff. Johnny Depp's character, the detective, says that they found different body parts, and they were all the fused arms, and he says it's a little T-Rex. I do like, though, when he goes under the water, and, he's almost drowning, he sees, like, a dead walrus man of yore from earlier. One of the previous victims. And he freaks out looking at it. And then this is another example of where the tone is just very uneven in this movie. Even though the premise, again, is ridiculous, Parks is playing it pretty much as a serious role. And it's kind of taking itself seriously through a lot of this movie. Like, we get this whole scene with Wendy and Teddy talking to, I don't know who he is, Canadian police, detective, something like that, and let him listen to the voicemails from Wallace. And there's just a lot of humor in this scene, and it's just not consistent with the movie up until this point. Then there's scenes that get even more ridiculous, not counting like the walrus fight at the end. Like, of course, that's insane. But I'm not talking about any of the walrus stuff. But yeah, there's a few scenes like that. And Johnny Depp's scene, and a lot of the scenes with him, but especially the scene where he's sitting down with them, and he's explaining his history, trying to track down this killer, and all the details of the crime, and that whole scene goes on for way too long. Johnny Depp's, his accent, I adore Johnny Depp. The guy can play anything. He can literally slip into any role, and you don't see him as Johnny Depp, you see him as that character. I think he's one of the greatest of his generation, like by far. But his whole character here just doesn't work for me. But again, it's so uneven with the tone in this movie. Like, does it want to be a horror comedy? Or is it trying to be serious? Or semi-serious as much as you can? So then after a few scenes, which this is really where it slows down for me. Once Johnny, and it sounds insane, because Johnny Depp coming into any movie usually is fantastic. This is just not one of them for me. It just doesn't work. So the three of them end up going looking for Wallace, which they know that he was in Winnipeg, and he was going about 2 hours from there. And then that's where he brings up everyone has a ritual in the car, smoking, and he likes the Slurpees and big soft drinks or whatever from convenience stores. So they stop at the convenience store that he was in earlier, and the two girls, Johnny Depp's daughter and the other one, refer to the guy as Mustache because he's a complete douchebag. And then Johnny Depp does the classic pad trick, notepad, where you take the pencil and you brush it, and then you can see what's written on the pad before that to find out exactly where he went. So they track him down finally, and they hear Wallace the Walrus's screams from his little aquarium there. And the best part about this whole movie for me, probably, is just because I'm a big Fleetwood Mac fan, and the fact that they play the song Tusk in a movie called Tusk is probably the best thing about this movie for me. Despite saying I highly, highly enjoy this, but what a perfect song to put into your movie. Almost thinking that he named it Tusk just because he had the Fleetwood Mac song in at the end. And for some reason, it's just because this guy's deranged, right? He has no real plan. He has this little embracing moment where he lays back on Wallace the Walrus, and then he dresses up in his own walrus suit and says, "You must fight me and be a walrus and fight me to the death or you die." So he just spent all this time trying to make this guy into a walrus, and it's the first successful time he's had in who knows how long. And who knows when some assholes are going to read the flyer that he put up in who knows how many bars. It could be years before he gets another chance at this. Why does he now want to kill him? Or be killed by the walrus? It's just because he's insane, right? That's the only thing I can think of. And as he's looks cool to the effects, as he's using his tusks to stab Howard over and over and over again, killing him. And he says, like, "Well done, Mr. Tusk," or some dumb line. But as that's happening, the three amigos, Wendy, Johnny Depp, and Teddy, almost forgot that time, burst into the place. And then, could you imagine the horror again of just seeing your boyfriend, your best friend, as a walrus? And there's no going back from that. And then Johnny Depp's character looks through the barrel of his gun, and he's about to shoot Wallace the walrus. Oh, Wallace, douchebag guy, but nobody on the planet deserves to have this happen to them. Nobody. I don't care who it is. No one deserves to be turned into a walrus man, or a walrus woman, or whatever you identify as. But he's about to shoot him. And why? The ending to this movie is fucking stupid. Like, that's one thing I gotta say. A year later, Teddy and Wendy go to some, like, outdoor pool or something that Wallace is living in. They let this guy live as a walrus? Are you fucking kidding me, man? This is his girlfriend and his best friend. And they don't think mercy killing is the best thing, that this guy deserves it or has any type of life being a walrus. This is another example of just the tone being uneven through all of this. We're supposed to take it seriously a bit, but then at the end, we expect to believe that they're going to let him live as a walrus for an entire year. And she comes by with him, I don't know how often do walrus people have to eat? He's still a human being, like, with his digestive tract. He's not an actual fucking walrus. So, I don't know how often they gotta come by and feed him. All of the ending is stupid. And I think they are planning a sequel, or at least the idea of it was pitched to Justin Long from Kevin Smith a few years back. It's a fun movie. It's entertaining. And when you really put yourself in the shoes of this guy, and all the characters in this movie, and just really think about the situation and that you're not getting out of it, is very effective at times. So, I mean, that was another curveball. But Tusk from 2014, which, this is 10 years old. Wow, I can't believe this movie's 10 years old. But alright, guys, I will talk to you soon. Hope everyone's having a good morning, afternoon, or night. Take care, everybody. That's it, Wallace. That's his name, Justin Long's character. And fuck. And then Haley Joel Osment. And you're going to live out the rest of your days as a walrus person. And you're going to live out the rest of your days as a freaky walrus person. And you're going to end up living the rest of your days out as just a morbid walrus. Or a walrus woman.